So today's webinar is about our April 21st Voice of the Patient Forum for Drug Development, which is a type of event known as an externally led patient-focused drug development meeting. We are calling it a Voice of the Patient Forum ourselves because that's a less technical term, and we felt that it really conveys in plain English what this meeting is really about fundamentally. It is about making your voice heard. We'd like to thank our sponsors and advocacy partners who are supporting our Voice of the Patient Forum, and that would include the Muscular Dystrophy Association, Optum Health, and Friends of FSH Research. Our speaker today is James Valentine of Hyman, Phelps, and McNamara, PC. James is an FDA regulatory consultant in Washington, DC, and has been working in this space for 12 years, helping patients, caregivers, and patient advocates have a voice in drug development and FDA decision-making. James was himself at the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, for 6 years. And during that time, he helped establish and launch the original FDA-led patient-focused drug development initiative. He now works directly with patient organizations like ours to help with these patient-focused activities. In fact, to date, there have been 31 externally led PFDD meetings, and he has helped to organize and moderate 2/3 of those meetings. Most importantly, he and his colleague, Larry Bauer, are partners to the Society in planning this landmark Voice of the Patient Forum. We're very fortunate to be in such excellent hands. So James, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm now turning over the floor to you.
Great. Thank you, June, and thank you for that kind introduction. Welcome, everyone. I'm glad to be with you today to provide you with some background and an overview that will help inform and set the stage for your participation in this Voice of the Patient Forum. We thought it was important for those of you that were considering participating, maybe you haven't yet decided, you wanted to learn a little bit more about what this was all about before deciding whether to participate, or even if you have already decided, you wanted to learn more so you could feel a little bit more prepared in advance of actually being with us, either in person or by the web on April 21st. And so that's our goal for you for today, is to spend some time with you, orienting you to drug development, where the patient voice fits into that, and giving you some more details about what this meeting actually looks and feels like. But before I do that, I just want to reiterate a little bit of what June just said, and before we start diving into some of the topics, if you're on this webinar, we want to make sure you know you're in the right place, and so we want all of the patients and caregivers, family members and loved ones of individuals with FSHD to know that this is an important meeting. This is an opportunity for you as experts in your own conditions, either from you're living with it as a patient or caring directly for someone with the condition, to really educate the FDA. What is it like to live with this condition? What are your concerns as the disease progresses? How are you currently managing FSHD? And thinking more towards the future, what would meaningful treatments look like for you or your loved one? And so why should you participate? Well, this is really kind of an important and milestone opportunity for your community to come together and have your voices heard. The FDA, is responsible, and we'll talk about this, for all treatments for FSHD here in the United States. And in order to make, informed decisions about those products it's regulating, it needs to know what's important to you, the ultimate end user of any potential product, or the individual that could be potentially protected from keeping a product from you if it perhaps doesn't work or isn't safe. This knowledge about your experiences and your priorities will impact their decision making and really lead to better treatments and potentially faster approvals for FSHD. So this is really important to help kind of drive innovation forward for treatments in your condition. So the question might be, well, why now? Why is this, why are we now being asked to do something like this? FSHD, wasn't discovered yesterday. So, one of the big reasons for this is that there really has been a big shift at FDA and within the drug development industry more broadly, where not up until recently, in the last 5 to 10 years, has the patient's voice really been part of the process. Typically the way that it would work was, when a drug was approved by FDA, it was done maybe not on meaningful endpoints for patients. So it was measuring something the thing that the drug was, you could learn about it being treating is something that maybe wasn't important to you. Or during development, during a clinical trial, if the trial was failing for some reason, there was some issue with maybe patients staying in the trial once they were recruited, or the measures that were being used weren't really picking up changes, even though maybe patients were saying that they experienced changes. Well, when this trial was failing for whatever reason, then the drug company or FDA would reach out to patients to try to help understand the problem. And as you can imagine, that's too late. That's a lot of resources have been expended to plan the study. Patients have volunteered their time, precious time to be a part in this study. And for the study, some issue that potentially could have been overcome by talking to patients first. I think there was enough experiences like this that everyone started to realize that we really should be putting the patient at the center from the beginning. And so that really is what has led to this patient-focused drug development initiative and these types of meetings, is that FDA and more broadly the whole ecosystem wants your voice is heard at the beginning and throughout the process. FDA, from the time that I was there and my colleague Larry Bauer was there, stakeholder engagement has shifted and become a priority. And that led to, back in 2012, the initiation of the patient-focused drug development program, really to learn about disease impacts on your lives and hear about that both from the patient and the direct caregiver perspectives, two perspectives that traditionally have not been utilized for their expertise. So for today's presentation, here's the topics that I'm going to cover. We're going to give you a little bit of background. We're going to kind of start at the highest level, give you some background on FDA and drug development. I know some of you, this may be kind of refresher material, but we wanted to make sure everybody is on the same page in terms of understanding kind of the bigger ecosystem. Then we're going to drill down a little bit and talk about the introduction to FDA's patient-focused drug development initiative, which is kind of, building on what we just talked about from talking about drug development, understanding where the patient voice can fit into that. And then we'll end kind of drilling down even further, kind of more into the weeds, talking about how to participate in this meeting. We'll give you some specifics about logistics, format, and tips for participation, as well as some other important information. And we will be saving questions and answers for the end. If you do have a question that you would like addressed, you can, as June mentioned, enter that into the Q&A tool, and we'll make sure to address that at the end of the presentation. So our first topic, background on FDA and drug development. What I'm going to do is I'm going to walk you through kind of the life cycle, the different stages that a drug goes through when it's being developed and trying to be understood, with the end goal of being able to have information to determine the safety profile of the drug, as well as the what we call the efficacy, or how well the drug works, its effectiveness. Because those two pieces of information then are critical for FDA to be able to then determine whether the benefits of a drug outweigh its risks, which is what it has to find to approve a drug. But there's a lot that goes into the development of a drug to be able to, in a stepwise fashion, understand it, start to expose it to more, to humans in the first place, but then more and more people over time as we learn more and more about it and feel more comfortable kind of putting it into larger populations. So at the very beginning is drug discovery. So, you know, even before, a product has ever been tested, there's scientists and researchers that are looking to understand disease and the disease process. So that way we can try to understand where there might be an opportunity to use a product or design a product to stop or maybe even reverse the effects of a disease. Many different compounds are tested when we do find those targets for intervening into a disease. We're looking, for existing treatments maybe that have unanticipated effects. Lots of drugs are used for many different diseases over time. Then when that drug was first used, it wasn't necessarily anticipated that, it might have these other effects. And so this is called repurposing, where we take a drug that's been initially developed for one indication, one disease, and use it in another. So we might screen existing treatments, or we might look for new technologies to try to target with medical products these different, kind of opportunities, whether it be, kind of at the genetic level or the cellular level, or maybe some other kind of physiologic impact in the body. So once, researchers identify that promising compound, they think it lines up with impacting the disease process in some way, then we embark on this well-established path to make sure that the product is safe and effective. So here's the first step. So we take that product candidate and we start preclinical work. So preclinical, clinical being in humans. So preclinical being work that we do before we ever study it in humans. We take that product and we're looking to see if it's reasonably safe to use in humans, and if it's sufficiently effective against the disease target, either in chemical assay tests, or we might have animal models of the disease. So we might have, a mouse or a rat model of a disease. We might have other animals that have either naturally or kind of through some kind of augmentation, a model of the disease that we can start to test and say, okay, does this, are we seeing signals? Are we seeing evidence that this is doing what we think it's going to do? And is it not being harmful to these animals? Or can we establish the threshold for which it is harmful in animals, so that way we can take that information and determine what dose would make sense to test in humans. And so at the end of this stage, this is the first time that FDA gets involved formally, which is with an investigational new drug application, sometimes called an IND. The researchers or the sponsor of the research, could be a company, takes all of that preclinical information along with information about how the product is manufactured in kind of a reliable, high quality way, and submits all of that information to FDA along with its plan for its first in-human study to advance it to be able to start testing the product in humans. That's then once FDA reviews that IND submission and involves all that information, it determines whether the company or the researcher can move forward with its first study. Often this is a phase 1 study, although in rare disease, a lot of these phases I'm going to talk about often overlap with each other and aren't done kind of stepwise, one at a time. So in phase 1, the emphasis is really on drug safety rather than benefit. So we're looking to see what are the most common side effects. We're trying to understand how the drug, since it's the first time it's in humans, actually is metabolized, how it's excreted, how long does it take to get the drug to the different tissues or cells within the body that it needs to get to in order to, have the effect we think it's going to get to those cells to have the effect that we intend for it. And so, if we can establish, kind of a safety profile, maybe some initial indicia of effect, of benefit, then we can move from phase 1 into phase 2. A phase 2 clinical trial, the primary goals here, we're starting to place that emphasis on drugs' effectiveness So what we're trying to do here is this is a phase 1 study may be in healthy volunteers rather than individuals with the disease or condition themselves. You know, because again, the focus is on safety. So if you want to know, kind of do this in a way that you know, mitigates risk, you might do it in healthy people first because they're less likely to have harm from a product and its risks. But phase 2 is done always in the patient population itself. And here you're starting to see if the drug works in the people who have that disease. Often you're comparing the drug against placebo. You're looking to continue monitoring for short-term side effects and other safety issues. So you're learning a lot of information at this stage. Sometimes this is called the proof of concept study. This is also an opportunity where you can test the different doses of the drug. So sometimes this is designed as a dose ranging study. So you might have heard those terms thrown out before: proof of concept, dose ranging. Those are typically phase 2 studies, where we're kind of, it's a good mixture of looking to see if the drug is working as intended in patients, using some short-term outcomes, as well as continuing to build that body of evidence about the safety profile. If all goes well in phase 2, then we move into phase 3. These are kind of the traditional kind of gold standard, often clinical trials. They're usually, you know, this is the largest patient population you're studying the product in. You know, phase 1 is the smallest. Maybe you have, you know, 5 or 10 people even in a phase 1 study of healthy volunteers. You know, phase 2, it gets larger depending on, this is all kind of scaled to the size of the disease. In rare diseases, this could be, you know, 10, 20 patients, something like that. And then in phase 3, you're kind of getting as many patients as you can reasonably recruit into a clinical trial. And more common or prevalent diseases, you know, these are thousands and thousands of patients. In rare diseases, it's much smaller. But the idea here is you're really designing a well-controlled study so that we can really assess the drug effect compared to a comparator group. So the traditional is a placebo-controlled group where kind of you're getting the sugar pill, so to speak. That way you can make sure that you're balancing out the placebo effect compared to drug effect. And people can be blinded to whether they're on drug or on placebo, so they don't know what they're assigned to. This is kind of all kind of the classic ways to try to do good research. So you're doing these bigger studies, sometimes one or kind of the standard is 2 in more prevalent conditions. In rare diseases, there might just be 1 phase 3 study for a drug. And you're looking at effectiveness here. That's your primary goal, is to establish that the drug works on the outcome measures that you've pre-specified. These studies are a little bit longer. I mean, you want to have a sufficient duration to be able to see the actual treatment effect that you're measuring. You know, often these can be year-long studies, but it can certainly be shorter depending on what the effect is and if the drug can actually have the effect in a shorter amount of time. You know, these are bigger, so you can actually look at different populations. It's harder to do in the earlier phase 1 and phase 2 studies. So you can look at men versus women, you know, different ethnicities, different age groups, things like that, to make sure that the drug doesn't act differently in different subpopulations. And again, you can continue here, you know, based off of what you've learned in phase 2, to look at varying doses as well. Even though efficacy or effectiveness is our kind of the key thing everybody's interested in, safety continues to be evaluated. And again, because this is a longer study, it allows you to start to, you know, better assess whether there's long-term safety issues. And you can also, because you have a bigger population, actually look to see if there's any drug-drug interactions, because, you know, lots of patients are on other treatments or other drugs for maybe comorbid conditions. And so you have enough people to start to look at those types of things in phase 3. Once those phase 3 studies are done and you know, assuming everything goes well again, you can then go in back to FDA and have a pre-NDA meeting. An NDA is a new drug application, or if you're talking about a biologic, like maybe like an enzyme or a cell or gene therapy, they get submitted under a biologics license application, or BLA. They're pretty interchangeable. Both are applications where FDA reviews all of the information, both from the preclinical and clinical data from throughout the whole development program, to assess whether the product meets the requirements for approval, the benefits outweigh the risks, that there's sufficient information to actually determine what the benefits are and what the risks are. And so that pre-NDA meeting is a good opportunity to meet with FDA to identify, what studies are going to be relied upon as your pivotal studies, discuss the different ways you can analyze the data in that application to FDA, and really uncover any major unresolved issues. So it's not always clear, whether the data are sufficient to establish benefit or risk. And so FDA may want you to go and do some additional work. Same could be on the preclinical side. There might be some additional animal work that FDA is looking for. So you want to have that discussion before you actually put together your application and submit it to FDA. Once it's in at FDA, FDA first looks to make sure it's a complete application. If it is, it files it and assigns it to a review team. That review team then goes to look at the, establish the effectiveness based on the drug's proposed use. So this is very important. A drug doesn't need to be effective for all populations. It doesn't even have to be effective for an entire disease. It only needs to be effective for the population that the application is asking for. So it might only be in patients, say, with moderate to severe disease and not patients with mild disease. Or it might be in only adult patients and not pediatric patients. You can see, depending on the populations you study and the results in those different populations, you might be asking for a proposed use that's something a little smaller than the entire universe of that particular disease or condition. So FDA looks at it from that, whatever that proposed use is. They're also looking at safety assessments, again, looking at all of the safety from preclinical through all the clinical studies. And then once they understand that, they can then evaluate whether the benefits outweigh the risks of the drug. Also important, we aren't really covering it in this webinar, but kind of the third leg of the stool is manufacturing and quality. So not in addition to making sure a drug is both safe and effective, FDA is making sure that the drug is manufactured in a quality way. So you're not worried about, is the drug going to be, different from lot to lot. So when you take that pill, you're not worried about, does it have actually more of the active ingredient than it's supposed to? So it might actually be, create more potential safety issues, or might it be a little underdosed, so that way you're not really getting the effect that it's supposed to have for you, or will there be things that aren't expected supposed to be in it, different contaminants that might pose some harm to you. And so that's the third prong of FDA review, focuses on that. During that review, FDA can take its review to an advisory committee. It's a panel of external experts, includes a patient representative to help it answer questions about the approvability of the product. And then ultimately, FDA makes the final call of whether the product should be approved. FDA's job doesn't stop there. If it does approve a product, it does have responsibilities to continue overseeing and regulating the product in the post-market phase, which is when the product is being marketed, it has been approved. And so, because clinical trials, as I've described them, it's you have specific questions you're trying to answer. Because of that, you tend to include only patients that maybe don't have as many other conditions, comorbid conditions. Maybe they're not on a lot of other drugs. Maybe they're not the most severe patients, the really, really sick patients, because those patients are expected to not do well. You kind of want an artificial population to be able to help you answer the specific question of, does the drug have an effect? But then when it goes out to the real world, all those other patients that weren't included in studies can potentially get the drug. And so, you might see new safety information because of that. And so FDA maintains a program to, for those events, adverse events to come in and be reported and potentially take actions against drugs, whether that be, kind of add that safety information to their label, but it could potentially take a drug off the market if it becomes too unsafe. So, I talked a lot about the different stages of research, the different types of trials. I talked only, a very little bit about where FDA fits into that. So what you should take away from that is it really is the companies or the researchers that are driving development. They make the final decisions on what their studies look like for the most part. But throughout development, FDA is being engaged with by those researchers and developers. Even though it's not FDA that's making those decisions, ultimate decisions. So just a couple things on what FDA's role is and is not. FDA is not the one developing drugs. That's what I just said. It's really the researchers, the companies, even sometimes nonprofit groups that are actually doing this research and drug development. It's also FDA that is not, FDA is not doing testing of drugs in clinical trials. So when a clinical trial has been set up, FDA is not the one running it. FDA staff are not there on site for the clinical trials. It's researchers conducting trials, and they, of course, have to seek that FDA approval before beginning. But once the trial is up and running, it's the researchers that are actually doing the trials themselves. Similarly, FDA, there's other things that FDA does not do. FDA does not have authority to regulate the practice of medicine. So FDA regulates the development and marketing of products, but healthcare providers like doctors are free to prescribe FDA-approved drugs for other conditions. You probably heard of this called off-label use. So FDA isn't regulating doctors and how they practice medicine within their own practices. Also, FDA is not regulating the price of medicine. So when FDA is reviewing benefits and risks, those are the direct benefits and risks they're looking at. They can't consider drug price, and they don't even know what the future drug price will be when they're reviewing a product. They're looking just directly at the safety and effectiveness of the drug itself. That being said, FDA does have a role, and it's part of its public health mission to help promote drug development. So FDA reviewers, they're reviewing hundreds and hundreds of applications over the years. So they're actually quite expert on drug development and clinical trials. They've seen not only things that work, but also things that can lead to failures. And so FDA staff do provide technical help to researchers and drug developers throughout development. There's lots of meetings that can happen, or different ways you can submit information to FDA to review. FDA then helps companies design clinical trials and studies. And so they're doing this kind of throughout development. As new learnings come from earlier studies, companies will go back in, present what they've found, and propose the next thing, then FDA will weigh in. And all of this is done with support from what's called the Prescription Drug User Fee Act, or PDUFA, that allows FDA to collect user fees when someone submits a marketing application. And then that pool of money is then used to fund the staff to do all of this type of review work early on. It wasn't always the case that there was enough funding for FDA staff to be able to engage so much throughout development. The great thing about PDUFA is it also gave FDA money back in 2012 to do patient-focused drug development and really prioritize that. So that user fee money was able to be used for PFDD because that really was seen as a way to help and enhance FDA's review work. So if you are interested in more information about FDA regulation, as well as ways that other ways that FDA involves patients beyond patient-focused drug development, which is the focus of today's webinar, I've included this URL to the FDA website and their For Patients page, which has a lot of information that's oriented to a patient and caregiver consumer audience. So with that, I'm going to transition to talking about patient-focused drug development. So now that you have a foundation of how drugs are developed, the decisions that FDA makes, the roles of FDA and researchers throughout the life cycle of a product being developed, it's important for you guys to also have a sense of where the patient voice can play a role in that. And so this specific type of activity, the patient-focused drug development concept, was something that came out of the agency because FDA wanted a more systematic way to get the patient perspective about the condition and about available treatment options. And it viewed that this information could help in their understanding of setting the context for benefit risk assessments and decision-making for new drugs. As I mentioned, FDA is looking at all of the evidence from clinical trials, from animal studies, to say what are the benefits of the drug, what's been established, what are the risks, what safety issues have come up. But ultimately, it's a judgment of whether the benefits of a drug outweigh the risk, and that's a very disease-specific judgment. Something like alopecia or hair loss, for example, might not warrant a drug that causes organ failure or could be life-threatening. But in cancer patients, they're facing the potential outcome of dying and dying fairly quickly in many cases. And so they're willing to tolerate really toxic drugs with lots of safety risks because of the nature of their disease. And so, FDA, kind of understood that there's so many diseases out there, it needs some help in calibrating that assessment. And so this information helps them do that. And so, not only does this help them do it for the review of the application and that benefit risk assessment, but also throughout development, because there's lots of questions where that same information can help inform clinical trial design, selection of outcomes to be used as endpoints. Lots of important decisions are made. And so the more FDA and drug developers understand the disease, the better they're going to do drug development in the first place. So the two categories of information that I keep alluding to, which are the two main types of information we're going to try to learn from you in this meeting, is first the analysis of the condition. It's just a fancy way of saying, we want to understand the things that are most burdensome, have the biggest impact on your life from having the condition. So what symptoms and health effects are most burdensome? How do they impact your daily life? That's analysis of conditions, understanding the disease experience. And the second is the second bullet on this slide, which is current treatment options. So we want to understand what are the different things, not just approved drugs, but what are the whole range of things that you might use to try to live with and manage your condition. It can be drugs, whether prescription or over the counter. It can be medical procedures, could be mobility assistance devices or other medical devices, or it could be more holistic things, diet, exercise, other lifestyle modifications even. And that helps us understand the unmet needs that exist by understanding what you currently have and how well those things are working. And then once those two categories of information are established, then you see those last three bullets. That's what we've been talking about, looking at benefits and balancing benefit with risk and potentially helping mitigate risk through some management techniques. But for FDA to be able to do those assessments, they need to first understand those first two categories of information, which is exactly what you'll be helping to do. So this voice of the patient meeting is the FSHD patient-focused drug development meeting, using the more technical term. This is going to be a framework for a discussion of questions that really help inform that benefit risk framework we just talked about. These are important considerations for FDA and its decision making. In our planning of the meeting, we've reviewed this and other disease area questions, and we're really tailoring our agenda and panel questions to communicate the most important information related to FSHD to FDA. So this is, FDA provides a framework, but then it's upon us to design the agenda and design the program to most, kind of be tailored for FSHD. The biggest thing to emphasize that this meeting cannot be successful without active involvement from patients and caregivers, and not just attending, but really, I don't even want to call you an attendee of the meeting. You're really a participant because you're there as an expert, and your participation, active participation in the meeting is key to success of the meeting because we're there to ask questions of you and have you share your experiences, your priorities. This information isn't going to just be communicated at the meeting itself. Of course, that's going to be an important time for FDA to hear from you, but the FSHD Society will also be preparing what's called a Voice of the Patient report after the meeting that's going to take into account all of the different testimony that was given. We'll talk about some of these other ways that we're going to gather information from you through polling questions and other written submissions. All of this then gets summarized in this report that really leverages quotes from individuals to try to give as much impact as possible. And that is then given to FDA review staff and to regulated industry, so companies, so that way they have a reference guide about what patients and caregivers most want to see in a treatment. And FDA really does want this information. I've heard from, my old colleagues at the agency, that they keep these reports on their desk. The division directors, they make sure their staff, they know about these and look at these when they're doing their reviews, because really they do know and have seen how this leads to meaningful development of treatments. So now let's kind of drill down to the third and final topic, which is really participating in the meeting. So some kind of basic logistics that I'll cover. And so who's the target audience here? So primarily it's you, individual patients and direct caregivers. It might be a parent, a sibling, a spouse, maybe even a child if your parent is affected. That's coming, that has experience helping care for a patient. We want to hear and have both patients and caregivers be active participants in this meeting. FDA staff will be invited to the meeting. They'll be there in listening mode. They will not be asking the questions. That will be us moderating the meeting. But FDA staff will be there. They've been have been kept in the loop on planning and have shared some of their insights. But in the day of the meeting itself, they're going to be sitting in the audience with you, really sitting there and listening attentively, but not answering questions or asking questions for that matter. Similarly, companies and researchers in the space that maybe are developing products for FSHD or maybe are interested in potentially developing a product will be in the audience, and they too will be there in listening mode. So we have this meeting scheduled for April 21st from 10 a.m. to 3:30 p.m. We're going to be holding it at the College Park Marriott Hotel and Conference Center, which is in Hyattsville, Maryland, just a short few minutes commute from the FDA campus in White Oak. We wanted to make this convenient to get as much FDA participation as possible in a central location. And you can participate in two ways. You can participate either in person in the room itself, or we're going to have a live webcast that you'll be able to participate in as well, where you'll be able to still answer questions and share insights throughout the day. So what does this meeting agenda really look like? So, we're going to start out, as you might imagine, with some welcome and introductory comments, both from the society as well as from the FDA. Kind of help set the tone for the meeting. For maybe people that didn't get to see this webinar, do a little bit of setting the stage of why your voices are important. We're going to then have a little bit of background on FSHD and clinical trials by FSHD clinical research expert. So we don't expect all of the FDA staff in the room to know FSHD and what causes it and how rare it is. And so, we want to kind of give them a little bit of background on what is known about the biology and the science. So that way, when they then hear from you later, they have a kind of a foundation that they're building on to understand, the clinical impacts, the day-to-day impacts of the disease. So once we do that background, then we get into the real meat of the meeting. Most of the meeting is dedicated to hearing from you. So we're going to break the meeting into those two topics we talked about earlier. First, how does FSHD symptoms affect your life? So what's the burden of the condition? And then second, how do you manage symptoms, and what are, both currently and what you would like from future approaches to treatment? So we're going to have these two separate discussions. Treatment conversation really does build on that first discussion around the disease. We have to first understand what the disease looks and feels like, to then understand how well treatments might be working for you all. So these topics, they're going to include a combination of patient panels as well as polling questions and a moderated discussion. So we'll kind of use those three tools to hear from you. And then we'll close out the meeting at the end of the day after we've spent all of that time hearing directly from you. So what is it you might be wondering? Are you going to ask us? You've told us you're going to pose questions to us, and we're going to be asked to, in a moderated discussion, raise our hand and participate. So what are those questions? So in that first topic on living with FSHD, we're going to ask you about the symptoms of your condition that have the most significant impact on your life. And, anytime you're thinking about any of these questions, we want you to really be thinking about, what is an example of that? How can I help paint a picture to have FDA really understand it? We don't want just a list. Here's 1, 2, 3, my top 3 things. Tell us why you picked those things. We also are going to ask, how does FSHD affect you on your best or on your worst day? Describe those best or worst days. Part of this is we really want to understand how variable the disease is. How much does it change day to day, week to week, month to month, or really even over the years? And then a third question that we'll ask is, are there specific activities that are important to you that you can't do at all or as fully because of your condition? And so, we don't want to just know the symptoms that are impacting you, but we want to know how those impacts actually impact your day-to-day life. So are there aspects of your social life or your work life or your home life, that are affected, and share with us the specific things, the specific activities that are impacted. As still on this first topic, we're going to ask specifically about those changes over time, as well as some of your fears or your worries for the future. So we know not all of the impacts of the condition are today. Some are things that are going to come later, or maybe they'll become more serious later. And so we want to know also, as you think about the future, what are the things that are worrying you most, or what is frustrating you most as you think about that? So then we're going to transition to that second topic. So here's some of the questions that we'll ask you about challenges to treating this condition. So we're going to ask, what are you currently doing to manage your symptoms? How well are those things working for you? Some things might work well for some and not for others. We also want to know what are important downsides of current treatments. So that might be safety issues if you're taking drugs, maybe to treat some symptoms. Maybe they're giving you, kind of side effects. Maybe it's just the amount of time that it takes to do something. There might be lots of different downsides. We want to understand what those might be. And then kind of to really, build upon everything from the entire day, we end by asking you about, short of a complete cure for your condition, what specific things would you look for a next ideal treatment? And so we really want to know specifically what it is that would make a difference in your life. What is it, an activity that you could, do more fully? Is it a symptom that you would like to be resolved, or maybe even just slow down how that symptom is progressing? It could be really, it's the universe, it's kind of open for what it is, and for you to express what you're looking for in a way that makes most sense to you. So we're going to ask those questions. We're going to do it in panel format first. So we'll have some individuals that are selected to kick off our discussion. We'll share some prepared remarks and kind of set the foundation. They're selected to reflect a range of experiences, so that way we kind of start out with a broad range of inputs. Like I said, that sets a foundation. We're going to build on that foundation then by going to all of you in the room and those be on the web and ask you some polling questions, this to get a sense of who we have in the room and online and the different experiences that you have, whether those be disease symptoms or treatments and things like that. And this will be really easy. You'll be able to just use your cell phones, or if you have a laptop or tablet, you certainly can use that. Those following along on the web, you can use your computers. Answer those polling questions. We'll get to see the results real time. And that'll help me as the moderator understand your different experiences so that I can probe and ask about those when we move into the third part, which is the audience discussion, which is really, like I described, you'll be raising your hands, I'll be asking discussion questions, and we'll be kind of working together as a group to help answer all of those. So my last slide here is just some tips for effective participation. We talked about FDA's role and where this meeting, kind of the purpose of this meeting fits into drug development. Keep those things in mind because that'll help you. It's kind of always useful to keep your audience in mind as you're sharing. So think about what FDA does and doesn't regulate. Focus on the areas that FDA does. You can always go back and look at these slides or this presentation. Review each of those discussion questions in advance. Start to think about examples that really help illustrate, the difficulties or the treatment experiences that you want to share. During the meeting, if you have something important to share, relate it to the most appropriate topic or panel. We're going to have time throughout the whole day to get to all these different questions. So if you have something really important to share about a treatment, wait until that second topic when that question comes up. Also, it's okay to reiterate a feeling or experience already voiced by someone. We want to know both those things that are unique or kind of, not as common of experience, but it's also important for FDA to know what experiences are shared by multiple people in the community. And so I just ask that if you do have something similar that you want to share, make sure to give your own personal take on that, give your own example and personal experience. It helps kind of round out the conversation. I will ask, and we'll always reiterate this, to try to keep your comments concise and focused. There's going to be a lot of people to be heard. It's easy to get emotional and kind of unfocused. So, and that's going to happen, and that's okay. But as much as possible, try to keep your comments concise so we can get to hear from as many people as possible. And just note that there will be a way to send in additional comments after the meeting, so you don't have to get everything out at the meeting itself. So it takes a little bit of pressure off you. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to June to talk about some additional logistics.
Yes, thank you so much, James. So I wanted to talk about how we are preparing for this April 21st meeting, and your participation is very critical all along the way. So I don't know if there's this graphic didn't seem to work. Oh, there it is. Okay, good. Great, thank you so much. So we are in about starting next week and over the next 2.5 months, we're going to be sending emails about this Voice of the Patient Forum. And superficially, you might think, oh, it's just a reminder. It's the same message I got before. They are not. Each one is unique. Each one is going to be asking you a different question or set of questions that will help us put together the best possible poll, the polling survey that will be done live on April 21st. So because that's a poll, that's going to have to be a multiple choice question. So the key with multiple choice questions, you've got to provide the correct choices, the choices that reflect the lived experience of all of you with living with FSHD as a patient or as a caregiver. So the surveys that are going out in advance are open-ended, inviting you to share in your own words, what are the most, the symptoms that have the greatest impact on your life, or how your own life aspirations and activities have been altered by having FSHD. And we'll look at those open-ended questions and condense them into these multiple choice questions. So these preparatory surveys are very, very important. So please do read each of them. And please do share them. If you have family members who may not be getting direct email from us, share it with them, because every individual response matters. And what this illustration just shows is those email responses from you go into that April 21st meeting and in the live poll, and those answers will then go into the Voice of the Patient report. So if we go to the next slide, I think, James, you have the controls.
Yep.
I think as James mentioned before, there are two ways to participate in the meeting. You can go in person on April 21st to the Marriott Hotel and Conference Center, or you can, right from home, log into the webcast, which will be a live stream over your laptop or computer web browser. You'll be able to hear what's going on. You'll be able to interact. These polls that people will be getting in the room on their mobile apps, you'll be able to get them on your laptop, and so on. And of course, all responses will be kept confidential. We do need you to register in advance either way, whether you're going in person or participating in the webcast, because both of these have limited capacity. Obviously, the conference center can only take so many people. We need to make sure we can prepare for the right number of people. And the webcast itself, even though it's an electronic room, does also have maximum number of people. We just want to make sure that everything runs smoothly on the day of. So please do register ahead so we can prepare for the number of people who will be participating. And the registration for the meeting is accessed through our website, or you can go to this URL, fshdmeetings.org/VOPF. That stands for Voice of Patient Forum. All right, and the comments following the meeting, there will be additional time for people to comment for 30 days after April 21st. If you have questions for us by email, if you back up 1 second. We have an email box for this, vopf@fshtsdsociety.org. All right, thanks very much. You can move to the next slide. So this is just to underscore, if you want to attend the live webcast on April 21st, go to our landing page. There's a place to register for the live webcast, register in advance, and the registration link for that can be found on our website, fshtsdsociety.org/FSH-events/VOPF. And you will receive a login link on the day of the live webcast. If you'd like to attend in person, again, space is limited, so please register as soon as possible. We already have people starting to sign up. We do have a block of rooms at the College Park Marriott Hotel and Conference Center that we have a discounted block rate for those rooms. But the travel and hotel expenses are the responsibility of the attendee. We so value your participation. The deadline to register for the live event is April 6th. And again, because space is limited, if for any reason you have to cancel, please do let us know, because we anticipate that there could be a waiting list. And we want to make sure that every person, as many people who want to attend have the opportunity to do so. Next slide, please. Okay, this is just, if you want to jot down the rate that we have, the discounted rate is $179 a night. And the way that works is once you come onto our website and register to attend, you will immediately get a page that pops up with a link to reserve for the room block. You can also call Marriott Reservations directly at the numbers provided, 1-800-228-9290 or 301-985-7300, and identify yourself as a guest who's attending the FSHD Society's Voice of the Patient Forum meeting. So the deadline for the hotel rate is March 24th. Again, the deadline to register to go is April 6th, but the hotel deadline is a couple of weeks before that, March 24th. If you are traveling from farther away than the Washington, D.C. area, your best options for flying there are Reagan National or the Baltimore BWI Airport. It's out of Baltimore. You can also take a train, Amtrak to Union Station. I think most of you, if you use Google Maps, it's a very good way to get detailed instructions on how to get from point A to point B. But if you need assistance with that, we can also help you with that. So today's webinar is being recorded and will be available online at youtube.com/FSHD Society. And again, if you have questions about participating, please send an email to vopf@fshdsociety.org. So just to wrap up, this is a unique opportunity to be part of the process of informing the FDA as we head into a time when we anticipate a growing number of FSHD therapies to go through clinical trials and arrive at the FDA in a package seeking approval. So your testimony about the various ways in which FSHD affects you, the unmet medical need because the current treatments are not, not reversing your symptoms, are not slowing down the symptoms, not adequately addressing them. So that's very important information to impart to the FDA. And as James outlined previously, this is a way that you can have a very, very meaningful impact on the clinical trial design and drug development process. And your voices have to be heard now before this onslaught that we hope of drugs coming, up for approval before the FDA. It's better it starts early. We don't want drugs to get held up in the FDA approval process. Sometimes that can happen for years. Mark Stone tells us a story about an organization he worked for previously where a drug that actually worked was not approved for a decade because the FDA did not have that education from the patient community about the disease impact and what patients would consider acceptable benefit to risk ratio for that treatment. So we really want to prevent that kind of debacle from happening by making sure your voices are heard at the beginning of the process. It really makes a difference. I think that's maybe at the end of our presentation.
Yeah, should we take some of the questions that we got in from the Q&A feature?
Yes, why don't we do that? So one question, maybe this goes to actually more of the FDA process. We had a question and we get asked this a lot. Clinical trials says once a drug is approved by the FDA, and I'd say on the basis of a trial involving adults, are other studies required before having the drug be available to the pediatric population?
Yeah, so this is a good question. There's of course never just a single simple answer. Certainly, so I'm going to assume here that the original approval is only for adults. And so, the way to get FDA to approve the indication to expand it into pediatrics is by doing an additional clinical trial in that population. You can then submit that as a supplemental new drug application to FDA. So it's not as big of a kind of a review requirement, in terms of all the information that needs to be submitted. It's a supplement to that original application that you had, and that gives FDA the information that they need to be able to, make a determination of benefit and risk in the pediatric population. That being said, even though, as I mentioned, FDA doesn't regulate the practice of medicine, and so if an individual physician feels that it is appropriate based off of the information that is available in adults, or perhaps publications, maybe it hasn't been approved by FDA, but there's a publication of a product being used within a pediatric population, they can, within their own determination of standard of care, potentially prescribe that product off-label. Of course, that's also subject then to insurance coverage and what different insurers are willing to cover in terms of what's not FDA approved. But to get the product to be approved by FDA, yes, it would need to be studied in that population if it's not initially approved for that population.
Okay, thank you so much. Let's see, so many questions. Some of them I can answer. So most patients won't travel to the upcoming meeting. Can written testimony be submitted ahead of time on patient experience and what we'd like to see in drug treatment? Yes, of course. And you can send that to that VOPF at FSHDSociety.org email address. And as I said, the series of emails that you'll be receiving over the next couple of months will be soliciting the kind of information that we are looking for in the testimony. So it'll guide you through different types of questions. So you might want to submit testimony by responding to those surveys. Okay. Let's see. There's a question. I think from the patient perspective, I think it seems almost obvious, blindingly obvious how FSHD affects you, your health, your daily living, and so on. And they say, well, it sounds like any number of questionnaires that people have received over the years. How is this different? And I think really, is there, James, can you help our audience understand how we translate that lived experience into something that's actionable on the part of the FDA?
Yeah, so it's the way that this is different and why this is important is, first off, FDA's never had an opportunity to hear this firsthand from such a wide range of patients in particular. So, while there might have been different, questionnaires and things like that in the past, there's no replacement really for having this face-to-face interaction where FDA gets to hear directly from patients about these issues. And then by having that direct interaction, FDA is going to understand, these things that may seem painfully obvious, but, FDA it may be a blind spot to them. And so if they don't know that a particular symptom is, kind of how that's burdening you and impacting your life, if they see a drug that comes down the line and has an impact on that, if they hadn't had this meeting where they understood why that is such an important thing to help, slow the progression on, stop the progression on, or maybe even improve, they might not give the same weight to it when they're doing that benefit risk judgment. And so you don't want to ever assume and leave it to FDA to make those judgments kind of, in a box, that you want them to really fully appreciate and remember. I mean, this is you're going to be making it really real for FDA. And so it's going to be hard for them to forget this. It's going to be ingrained in their memories and in top of mind when they're then looking at trial results.
Great, thank you so much. And here's an interesting, I think it's a comment as much as a question about, is it appropriate at the meeting for us to offer feedback that is deliberately focused rather than just answer the questions that are presented? What I have in mind is this: I have heard that FDA does not consider it worthwhile to pursue a treatment that results merely in stopping the progression. However, merely stopping the progression would be extremely valuable to me, and I want FDA to hear that message loud and clear. And I think,
yeah, so my advice here is to, answer the questions that we have designed were designed very specifically with the ability to impact drug development. And so rather than, for example, putting FDA on the defensive by saying, you don't consider this valuable, it really is. We have a question that actually asks this exact thing. We ask you, short of a cure for your condition, what is it that you're looking for from an ideal treatment? And your ideal treatment, as this individual commented, is slowing of the progression. And so if people are answering that question loud and clear that way, if that is FDA's position, you can help change FDA's position. So I think, really look at the questions that we have. I promise you they're designed in a way, and I've seen it in the past, where FDA has changed positions that they have taken on what's meaningful by hearing and listening to these meetings.
We have a question here. How are comments or concerns from caregivers incorporated? So I think.
Oh, so I apologize if sometimes I shorthand and refer to patients, and it's even called, voice of the patient. So I'm sorry if I didn't emphasize this enough, that it's really not just the patient perspective, but we know caregivers, those direct caregivers, have a lot of insight to add. And so anytime a patient is being asked a question, we're really asking the questions to both patients and caregivers. And we'll hopefully make that nice and clear at the meeting, but we'll be, patients and caregivers can answer polling questions. Patients and caregivers can be on the panels. Patients and caregivers can participate in the audience discussion.
Great, thank you so much. Let's see. Okay. Oh, here is a question that I think says, for discussion, the wisdom of FSHD, quote unquote, elders should not be overlooked because of age limit. Older FSHDers have been through all the various stages of compensating and have much wisdom to share. And I think it might be important to kind of mention that I think there's some confusion around, because clinical trials often limit the age of participants. 60 years old might be the upper limit, or 65 years old. That has maybe created a perception that treatments are not being developed for older people, or that older patients' views are not being counted. James, do you want to address that?
Yeah, so first and foremost, for this meeting is open to the entire community, the entire FSHD community. So, whether you're, the caregiver of a young person with the condition, or you're, as this commenter put it, an elder with the condition, we want and value your participation in the meeting. When it comes to clinical trials, which, are different, as I noted, they're designed to be kind of in ways an artificial population to help answer questions. That doesn't mean that the older population, just because they weren't studied, can't get approval for that population. Oftentimes there's exclusions just for those reasons of designing a trial to help answer your questions, but unless there's reason not to, FDA will often consider including a label that covers the older patient population. But we're going to be talking about participating in trials, and as it relates to one aspect of treatment that because people with rare conditions often use clinical trials as part of their standard of care in many ways. And so, if having the opportunity to participate in trials but not having them because you're excluded is important to you, that's something that you certainly can mention in the second topic of the meeting.
Great. Thank you. I think that gets us through our questions for today. We do have people who have specific questions about what kinds of treatments are being developed, what's in the clinical trial pipeline. That was not really the focus of today's meeting. This Voice of the Patient Forum is important for all trials coming down and coming through the pipeline, as it were. It creates the knowledge base for the FDA to evaluate all of these therapies, potential therapies coming through. But for information about specific research about new drugs, please do. Again, we have a lot of webinars, we have radio shows, we have articles, we have our patient conference coming up, the FSHD Connect, where there will be many, many presentations about specific drug treatments. I just wanted to make sure everybody was aware of that as well. So with that, I think we're a little bit past our time, but James, we thank you so much for taking your valuable hour today to share this information today. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for having me, and thanks everyone for tuning in on this holiday Monday.
All right. Bye.
All right. Bye-bye, everyone.